Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff. I'm one of the lay teachers here at MABA. And I'm honored to give the Dharma talk today. My talk is going to be on equanimity. So, that one's got a thing on it. Lindsay, can you? Oh, you got it. So, equanimity is one of those things that's spoken about a lot in Buddhism, and not everybody really defines it very well. I think part of what I want to do today is kind of talk about equanimity, and they call them the Brahma Viharas. So there are four things basically that we'll kind of talk about briefly. But the real thing about equanimity is, for me, the role that it has in personal transformation. So equanimity is something that you can kind of encounter through meditation, get to know, and basically what it does is leads to a sense of mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temperament. That's really what it is as far as a definition. When you're working with equanimity, a lot of what you'll feel is kind of an equalness of the mind, a sense that things are sort of leveled out, unconcerned when distractions come up in meditation. And the Buddha sometimes spoke of equanimity in almost like a tangible sense. So it's something that you can work with, something that you can cultivate, something that when you do cultivate it can produce results. There's a phrase that comes up a lot of times in the Pali Suttas that when equanimity is concerned and talked about and used, talks about this specific phrase a few times: the equanimity, the neither pleasant nor painful feeling, the mental unconcern due to tranquility, the purity of mindfulness, and the unification of mind. And not all of that is equanimity. Obviously, those are different factors, but a lot of times these kind of come up, and during meditation, when they do come up, they tend to come up together in deep concentration. So, and equanimity is, as far as what is it, it's also one of the factors of awakening. So there are 7 factors of awakening, and equanimity is one of those. The other Brahma Viharas that we'll talk about, and I'll talk more about what those are not specifically factors of awakening. So equanimity is important to being able to see reality as it really is. But I think it's also good to contrast when we talk about equanimity being a state of mind or something that you can experience, something that you can feel. It's good to look at what the normal state of mind is. So when we're going through our day, the normal sort of state of mind is, you encounter things either in the world or in your mind if you're meditating. And you're thinking about these things, these mental things come up, and either you're thinking that you like them, you don't like them. It's not often that we feel totally neutral about things that occur in our mind. So for example, we'll see something that we like, for example, a piece of pizza or cake or something like that. And there's always something that comes up. You're very seldom going to see an object just for what it is. But equanimity is part of what helps you to do that, to kind of see things without the ego coloring your perception of whether you like it, you don't like it, not bringing all of these experiences and memories that you have of this of past experiences with this object or whatever it is that comes up in your mind. So you might see the piece of pizza and not really thinking about whether you like it or don't like it. With equanimity, it would be more of just seeing that there is pizza, or there is this object. But I think more importantly, equanimity, as far as when you experience it, when it comes up, when you do encounter it and work with it, is kind of what's left after, during meditation. You're sitting, the distractions, the hindrances are coming up. And once the hindrances start to be a little bit more quiet, equanimity is something that can be left after all of those things start to quiet down. So I think it's important to note that sitting in meditation for longer periods of time can sometimes give you a little bit more of a chance, longer meaning 30 minutes or more, give you a chance to really experience something like the mind beginning to calm down and seeing what's there, seeing what's left after it does. I'll talk more about specific methods and how do you work with equanimity instead of just talking about it, but how to do this. So there are what they call the 4 Brahma Viharas, the 4 immeasurables. There are some of them you may have heard of, metta, goodwill, loving kindness, friendliness, has a lot of different names. Compassion, those to the left are the Pali words. So a lot of people just know metta and karuna, but empathetic joy is another one. It can be defined in a lot of different ways. And then there's equanimity, and that's the 4th one. So all of these are useful tools that you can use. Talking about loving kindness, it's a good place to start if you don't have any experience with the Brahma Viharas and using those for meditation, because it's relatively easily understood. I think something like equanimity is a bit lofty. It's something that maybe, if you haven't specifically had the experience of feeling completely stable and neutral and pretty much unmovable inside, then I think that's kind of lofty, like I said. But loving kindness, that's something that's very easily accessible and we can understand. But I will get to that in a few minutes. So what is the purpose, basically? What use is equanimity? Why would we really want to cultivate it? And specifically, why is equanimity really, really useful? Equanimity really leads to a sense of harmony with yourself, with your thoughts, with your environment, and the way that you interact with your environment. So equanimity, when you really get to know it, when you spend a lot of time in meditation experiencing that, you can use it as your object of meditation. It leads to a sense of stability. So when you go out into the world, when you're not in meditation and you encounter things that might ruffle you, that might cause distress, or things that might cause you an unbalanced sense of joy. Sometimes there can be joy is good and happiness is good, but sometimes you can get a little carried away with, watching a TV show that you really like or something like that. And that's not really a healthy kind of joy all the time. Sometimes it can lead to feeling unbalanced. So it leads to dealing with the world in a more balanced way. So, but they're all useful tools in their own way. So compassion can be useful when you're dealing with feeling angry with someone, or someone is angry with you or has done something that's hurtful. Helps you to understand their point of view. Empathetic joy is a really good thing for taking you out of yourself and really helping you to see things from other people's experiences in their own eyes. So they all have their own sort of use. But I think equanimity is maybe the most useful because it helps with really pointing the way, or really developing a sense of maybe harmony, working with others. So, for example, I think of it like this analogy, like if you're just one person working on your own, there's only so much you can do, you know. It's kind of like the analogy of 5 fingers. So if you have one finger, there's only so many things you can do. You can maybe pick something up, you can point the way, could prod other people to action, but not much more. If you have 2 people that are in harmony, then you can accomplish even more, and so forth, up to, you know, if you imagine 1,000 hands working together can accomplish many different things. But equanimity, where that comes in, is if we can, for our own sense of how we're dealing with the world, if we can be at harmony and understand and be with the perspectives of others, I think that it leads toward a sense of working together a little bit more. But I think that the self really tends to get in the way. So really what it is, and what other people have defined equanimity as, is also the most similar to, if you're really looking at the experience itself, the most similar to reality as it really is. So if you can really see reality as it really is, you can work with other people and accomplish a lot more. But talking about how can equanimity be a tangible thing? How can you use it, experience it? How do you work with it? Basically, what is cultivating equanimity? There's a lot of times, if you look at Brahma-Vihara meditation, that they talk about cultivating. They mean anybody that teaches it might talk about cultivating it. But what does that really mean? I think that it could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I don't think that's always very well defined. So I'll talk a little bit about that, because I know it is really helpful to hear the specifics of how do you work with compassion, how do you work with loving kindness, all those things. So as I didn't really talk about it, but on the previous slide I had how one Brahma Vihara tends to unfold into the next. So the place to start with experiencing and dealing with the Brahma Viharas is developing first the concentration to be able to stay with an object of meditation. So they do talk about equanimity and concentration and a lot of different things in the Anapanasati Sutta. There are a lot of different places that the Buddha talks about equanimity, Satipatthana Sutta. So a lot of the most famous teachings about meditation talk about developing concentration, experiencing these deeper states of concentration. But we'll talk more in just a second about how do we do that? It's not really just imagining what that feels like. I think there is a sense of that comes in. But just imagining what cultivating loving kindness doesn't really bring it about necessarily, or it didn't for me for a long time. You can imagine what it is and bring up the object of meditation. But sometimes I think with imagining, with trying to bring up an object of meditation that's not a tangible one, like your breathing or your body, then I think it can start to feel like a sense of striving, like a sense of clinging. Because if you're really trying during meditation, it kind of defeats the purpose. You're supposed to be ideally relaxed with your object of meditation and just being with it, not doing anything, not trying to do something, and maybe having an intention to be with your object, but not striving or clinging or grasping. So you do start maybe in the beginning by bringing up loving kindness. And talking about equanimity, I start with loving kindness because it does tend to unfold into the next Brahma Vihara. If you really stay with your object of meditation, um, and you get good and experienced at staying with it, then you will eventually see that it starts to change a little bit. So you may stay with your loving kindness, and maybe sometimes you don't have loving kindness at that moment. Maybe you try to call it up and it doesn't come, or maybe you've stayed with it for a long time and you feel something different. Maybe you feel this sense of peace, of this sense of perfect stability that I'm talking about. So it doesn't always unfold from one Brahma Vihara to the next. It might go from loving kindness into equanimity. But if your object of meditation changes, then you can try to recall it if you want to. But sometimes what you're finding is that your meditation is getting deeper. You're beginning to see reality more as it truly is. And you don't need to try to change it back to what it was. You can just kind of go with it and continue to observe. Of course, there's the chance that it could be a distraction, a hindrance, or something that comes up in the mind and tends to pull you away from your meditation. But you can kind of tell whenever that happens. So anyway, you start with loving kindness and you use it as your object of meditation. When you're doing that, of course, you will get distracted. That's a normal thing. But I think following a process of redirection is important. This is a specific process that I've had some experience with, but there are many different ways that different teachers have for coming back to your object of meditation. This one, I've studied it a bit. It's called the 6 R's, and it follows a bit of a sequence. The idea eventually is that it's not going to be a sequence that you're going to go through. It'll be just sort of an action. Like you would notice that you became distracted. You sit down to focus on loving kindness. Then notice that you've become distracted. And then you can perform this process, which is to recognize that when you notice it, you release the distraction without pushing it away. I think that's part of the most important part. You can't really push away a distraction, or else you get distracted by pushing it away, and then you get sucked into sort of a tension that comes. So that's the next part, is you release your sort of hold on it as much as you can, and then relax any tension or stress that's arisen. Oftentimes for me, I know that's in my head or in my chest, sense of closedness or stress that comes up. Part of the 6 R's is to re-smile. But re-smiling doesn't necessarily have to mean smiling itself on your face. It can. It helps with loving kindness, but it's more about developing an openness of mind. So when your distraction comes, you recognize it, release it, relax, and then you bring about that sense of openness again, a lack of stress, a lack of tension. And then you return to your object of meditation, just gently coming back, resting your attention on loving kindness, whatever it is. If it's compassion, if you're dealing with trying to work with, the anger of others or your own anger, compassion, like I said, helps there. So you would bring your mind back to that. And then just stay with it. And every time you get distracted, you would go back and just return to the object of meditation. And I like this process for me because I think when I started to meditate, I really had the sense that I was striving to stay with the meditation. I was tense and I didn't know it. I didn't realize it. I didn't develop until much, much later a sense that I was causing my own tension and stress by trying to stay with this object of meditation. So it's a type of clinging. It was for me. And when I went with this type of process where I can relax that tension and pay attention to it, understand that there's a way around it, sort of not really getting away from it or letting it go, but just moving back to the object of meditation without stress, then things really start to change. I think they did for me. I think one of the really benefits of working with the Brahma Viharas is that over time it tends to sort of change your outlook on things. So I know when I was younger, before I started meditating and really getting into Buddhism, I'm probably like a lot of people. I had a lot of issues. I've dealt with a lot of different things in my life. And one of those is, public speaking. It's one of those things that I've always been afraid of. For me, it's a really, really big step that I can even come up here and do something like this, because it's scary. Other people can look at you and you might say something stupid, or you might say some wrong thing, or you might, it's very vulnerable. But this is definitely for me evidence that working with equanimity, working with your own mind and how you're interacting with the world can lead you to a place where there is a sense that you can face your fears, you can deal with them. But not only that, I think the more important point is it's helped me to see reality as it is a lot of times, or as close to that as I've been able to get. Not an enlightened person, but by meditating frequently, I would recommend at least 30 minutes a day if you're going to meditate with this type of process. And on the Brahma Viharas, I think no matter what your meditation object is, if you spend more time with it, you get to know it. And by getting to know it, you will gain some experience with it. And even if that is just the breath that you're using, no matter what meditation object it is, eventually you will, by staying with it, by relaxing, by not grasping onto your object of meditation, but sitting with it, just being there with it together, you will eventually come to this sense of peace, this sense of equanimity, because eventually what you do is you start to begin putting things down. At least that's how it feels for me. So a sense where you're sitting, you start to have all of these things that are coming up, these distractions, the sense that you want to go somewhere, sense that you want something, you don't want something. And eventually you just kind of get tired of it. And it's easy at a certain point to just sort of say, I don't feel like doing it anymore. It's so exhausting. And it really does feel like that. And there's also a sense that eventually, before maybe you feel any sense of great peace or anything like that, you might start to also feel like maybe your hands are sitting, however you have your hands, you can put down your hands, you can put down your breathing to where your body is breathing on its own. Your hands are sitting on their own. Your body doesn't need to be a sense of focus. You don't have to have that there to sit. Just being with yourself. And then once you can just be with yourself, with the object of meditation, then all of those distractions kind of go away, and you're only with that. You're only with that sense of meditation, that object itself. So I would recommend trying it. I think my Dharma talk might be a little bit short. Okay, couple minutes. I would recommend trying it. Working with the Brahma Viharas, I'll just go back to the slide on those. If you want to look up information about those, there's tons of resources out there. You can pick one and try to work with it. Like I said, equanimity is probably the most difficult to really grasp exactly what it feels like. The other ones are pretty straightforward. Empathetic joy is a little bit defined in different ways. You can imagine, like, being happy for a child as it learns, he or she, I should say, learns to tie their shoelaces. You're not wanting something or getting something from that, but you're happy for them. Similar to that, but the other ones, they can all function as a sort of antidote for other things. Compassion, like I said, anger, goodwill and loving kindness. Well, that's good for a lot of different things. But equanimity is good for restlessness, anxiety, fear, a lot of the things that I think we are facing in the world, not just in general, but more and more, I think, over time. It's easy to get caught up in anxiety, fear, those type of things. So anyway, try it. And if you guys have any questions, I'm very familiar with this process. I would be happy to talk about it. But of course, there are many teachers here as well. So thank you.